Richard Miller never imagined that after 64 years of hard work, sacrifice, and raising a family, the greatest betrayal would come from within his own home. Once a respected construction worker in Ohio, he spent decades building houses, brick by brick, so others could have the comfort of a safe place to live. Now, retired and widowed, Richard thought his modest home and his small pension would be enough to carry him peacefully into old age. But life had other plans shaped by the actions of his only son. Daniel Miller. Daniel, now 38, was once the little boy Richard carried on his shoulders, the boy he worked double shifts to send to college. But today, he has become a man consumed by greed, a stranger who barges into his father's home demanding every cent of his pension check and leaving Richard's refrigerator empty for days. Caught in the middle of this storm is Ethan, Richard's 12-year-old grandson, whose bright spirit is the only light left in his grandfather's darkening world. Ethan brings food when he can, and more importantly, he brings hope. And then there is Margaret, Richard's loyal neighbor, who sees the bruises in the empty pantry and refuses to look away. Together with her niece, Sarah, social worker and officer James Carter, a detective who has seen too many cases like this, they will uncover a truth more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Because Daniel isn't just stealing from his father, he's tangled in debts, crime, and choices that could destroy them all. I wish I could tell you that things got better after that day, but the truth is, they only grew darker. Daniel wasn't satisfied with my pension checks. He wanted more. One evening, he stormed into my kitchen, his shirt pressed sharp, his wrist flashing a watch worth more than all my furniture put together. He leaned across the table, his voice low and dangerous, and said, "Dad, I need the deed to the house." At first, I thought I hadn't heard him right. This house was all I had left, the home I built with my own hands after long days hauling bricks and pouring cement. Every nail, every beam, carried the memory of my late wife, Linda. It wasn't just a roof over my head. It was the promise I had made that someday, when I was gone, Ethan would inherit something solid and good in this world. I told Daniel no. My voice shook, but I meant it. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw a side of him I didn't recognize. He grabbed me by the collar, shoved me against the wall, and hissed that if I even thought of calling the police, I would never see my grandson again. That night, I sat in the dark, my body aching from the shove. But what hurt most was my heart. I kept asking myself where I'd gone wrong. How had the boy I once rocked to sleep, the boy I carried 2 ball games, turned into this man who looked at me like I was nothing but a burden? The next morning, my neighbor Margaret knocked on my door. She took one look at my bruised arm and didn't wait for excuses. She marched right in, brewed coffee in my half-empty kitchen, and said, "Richard, enough is enough. This isn't just family drama. This is abuse." Her words stung, but deep down I knew she was right. Margaret called her niece, Sarah, a social worker who specialized in protecting seniors. When Sarah arrived, she listened quietly as I finally let the whole story spill out: the missing pension checks, the empty refrigerator, the threats. She nodded and said, "Mr. Miller, what your son is doing has a name. It's elder abuse, and it's a crime." Part of me wanted to slam the door on her words. Calling my son a criminal felt like calling myself a failure. But Sarah's calm, steady voice planted a seed. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as I thought. A few days later, Officer James Carter came to see me. He was a seasoned detective, the kind who carried years of hard cases in his eyes. Lecture he didn't push. He just said, "Richard, I've seen too many fathers suffer in silence. If Daniel is willing to steal from you, he's desperate enough to put Ethan in danger too." That hit me like a hammer. Until then, I'd been thinking only about my own survival. But the thought of Ethan caught in the middle, that was unbearable. My grandson deserved better than to grow up learning that it was normal for a man to hurt his own family. With Sarah and Officer Carter guiding me, I agreed to take the first steps. We gathered Ethan's secret recordings of his father bragging. On the phone, Sarah documented the bruises. Carter filed an official report. It was terrifying, but for the first time in months, I felt something stir inside me, a flicker of hope. When the judge granted me temporary custody of Ethan and issued a protective order against Daniel, I should have felt relief. And in some ways, I did. But as I walked out of that courthouse holding Ethan's small hand, I also felt the weight of sorrow pressing down. My only son was sinking into a world of debts and lies. I couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was waiting just around the corner. That night, as Ethan slept on the couch in my living room, I sat awake staring at the old family photos on the wall. One picture in particular caught my eye. Daniel at 10 years old, grinning from ear to ear, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. For a moment I could almost hear his laughter, and I wondered, was that boy still in there somewhere? Or had I already lost him forever? I thought the court order and custody papers would draw a line under it all. I thought maybe, just maybe, Daniel would realize he had gone too far and step back before things grew worse. But life doesn't work that way, and the storm was only beginning. One evening, it's just a week after the judge's decision, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. My heart sank before I even saw his face. Daniel stepped out of a dark sedan, his clothes still expensive looking but rumpled, his eyes darting like a man carrying too many secrets. When he pushed open my front door without knocking, I caught the smell of whiskey clinging to him. He didn't waste time with greetings. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "I need those papers for the house." The way he said it made my blood run cold. I had hidden the deed, knowing this moment might come. That house wasn't just wood and shingles, it was all I had left to give Ethan. Promise that when I was gone, he'd never have to wonder where he belonged. I told him no, plain and simple. My voice trembled, but I stood my ground. When the mask came off, Daniel grabbed my shirt front, shoved me hard against the wall, and hissed words that chilled me to the bone. "You either hand them over, or you'll never see your grandson again." That night, after he left, I sat in my chair with my chest aching, not from the shove, but from the grief. I thought about the boy Daniel used to be, the kid who once begged me for one more push on the swing, who waved proudly when I showed up to every Little League game. Where had that boy gone? The next morning, Margaret came by again. She took one look at me and knew. Her eyes narrowed, and she said, "Richard, this isn't just desperation anymore. He's dangerous." She was right. Even Sarah, the social worker, admitted we had crossed into new territory. What started as financial abuse was now turning violent. Detective Carter didn't mince words either, told me plainly, "Richard, if your son is willing to rough you up, there's no telling what he might do next. And if he's this desperate for money, it means he owes it to people far worse than you." That struck me like a hammer. All this time I thought Daniel was simply reckless, burning through money he didn't have. But now I began to see another. Picture one where my son wasn't just hurting me, but dragging us all into something darker. And then came the proof. Ethan, sharp-eyed as ever, confided in me one night while we sat at the kitchen table. He had seen a duffel bag in his father's closet. Inside were stacks of cash, strange powders and baggies, and even a gun. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just about money. Daniel was neck-deep in something criminal. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fit too well. The sudden wealth, the constant debts, the fear in his eyes. My son wasn't just desperate, he was in trouble with dangerous men. Not long after, I found a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It was Daniel's handwriting, shaky and uneven. "Dad, I need to see you. Alone. Riverside Park, 6 p.m. It's life or death." I stared at that note for a long time. Part of me thought it was a trap, or that he wanted to corner me into signing something. But another part, the part that still remembered the little boy who used to slip his hand in mine, told me Daniel was truly afraid. Detective Carter urged caution. "We'll back you from a distance. You won't be alone." And so, with a microphone tucked beneath my shirt, I went at 6 sharp. I sat by the old fountain in Riverside Park. The air smelled of cut grass and damp stone, and my heart pounded so hard, I thought it would echo across the water. And then I saw him. Daniel limped toward me, his face bruised, his shirt torn, as if he'd been beaten within an inch of his life. He dropped onto the bench beside me, eyes darting nervously, and whispered, "Dad, it's too late. I've messed up so bad. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I didn't see the greedy, angry man who had stolen from me. I saw my son, broken, terrified, and begging for forgiveness asterisk. When Daniel slumped onto that park bench, battered and bruised, I barely recognized him. His voice shook as he whispered, "Dad, I've dug a hole I can't climb out of." For a moment, I sat frozen, torn between anger for what he'd done and sorrow for what he'd become. But before I could answer, I noticed movement across the park. 2 men, tall and broad, striding straight toward us. Daniel's eyes widened with panic. "They found me," he muttered. "We have to move now." I was 64 years old, with knees that cracked when I climbed stairs. Running through Riverside Park wasn't something I was built for anymore. But fear does strange things. Daniel pulled me by the arm, and somehow I kept pace as we dodged behind trees and cut across the grass. The men were closing in fast, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. "Over here?" Daniel shouted, steering us toward an old maintenance shed at the edge of the park. We slipped inside, our breaths ragged, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and damp soil. In the dim light, I could see my son trembling, his face pale under the bruises. "They want me dead, Dad," he confessed. "I owe them money I'll never be able to pay back. Drugs, guns, it's all bigger than me." His words spilled out, like water from a broken pipe. Before I could respond, the sound of heavy boots crunched outside the door. A hand twisted the rusty handle. The door swung open, and 2 masked men filled the frame. One raised a pistol, pointing it directly at me. "There's our debt collector," the taller one sneered. "And the old man, too." I thought my heart would stop right then. But Daniel stepped forward, spreading his arms wide, as if to shield me. "Leave him out of this. He's not part of it." The shorter man laughed. "He knows too much. You both come with us." Time seemed to slow. My son, this man who had stolen from me, threatened me, betrayed me, looked back over his shoulder. And for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew. His eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in so long, love. "Dad, run," he shouted, lunging at the gunman. The shed erupted in chaos. The pistol went off, deafening in the tight space. Daniel wrestled with one of the men while I, without thinking, grabbed a rake from the corner and swung with all the strength left. In me, the second man staggered back, but it wasn't enough. Another shot rang out, and a searing pain tore through my shoulder. I stumbled, clutching at the wound, my vision blurring. The last thing I saw before falling to my knees was Daniel's face twisted in terror, shouting my name, his voice raw with regret, and then the crash of boots, the shout of authority, "Police! Drop your weapons!" Detective Carter and his team flooded the shed, weapons raised, their voices firm and commanding. In seconds, the masked men were on the ground, their pistols kicked away. Daniel knelt beside me, tears cutting through the grime on his face. "Dad, don't leave me, please. I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry." His hands trembled as he pressed against my wound, trying to stop the bleeding. I wanted to speak, to tell him I forgave him, to say that no matter what he had done, he would always be my son. But the words caught in my throat as the darkness pulled me under. The last sound I remember was Ethan's name on Daniel's lips, whispered like a prayer. When I opened my eyes again, the world was nothing but the steady beep of machines and the faint sting of antiseptic. A fluorescent light hummed above me, and for a moment I thought I was dreaming. Then I felt the weight of a small hand curled around mine. Ethan, my grandson, sat beside the hospital bed, his eyes red from crying, but still holding on like he was, the anchor keeping me in this world. "Grandpa," he whispered, voice breaking, "you're okay. They said you're going to be okay." I tried to smile, though the pain in my shoulder made it hard. "I've been through worse, champ," I murmured. We both knew that wasn't true. On the other side of the room, Detective Carter stood with Sarah, the social worker. Their faces were serious, but there was a relief in their eyes too. They told me the men who attacked us had been taken into custody. Daniel, they said, had been cooperative, almost desperate to help once the guns were out of the picture. It was a strange thing to hear. For so long, My son had been the one tearing me apart, and now at the very moment I thought I'd lost him completely, he had thrown himself between me and danger, but the relief didn't last long. Carter leaned closer and said, "Richard, we need to talk about Daniel. He's not just a desperate man in debt. We've uncovered proof that he's tied to a drug operation. It's a kind that doesn't forgive mistakes." The words hit me harder than the bullet had. Drugs, guns, debts that could bury him alive. My son had stepped into quicksand, and the more he fought, the deeper he sank. Later that night, when the hospital hallways had gone quiet, Sarah returned with news I hadn't expected. "Richard," she said gently, "the court confirmed custody. Ethan is legally under your care now." I glanced at my grandson asleep in the chair, his head resting on folded arms. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of a child who had carried too many worries for someone his age. He should be out playing baseball, not worrying if his dad will come home alive. I whispered. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "He's safe with you. That's what matters now." But in the silence that followed, I couldn't shake the ache in my heart. Because Ethan wasn't the only one who needed saving. The next morning, Margaret came to visit. She brought homemade soup in a thermos, fussed over me like a sister, and finally said what no one else had dared. "Richard, you've got to decide. Do you protect yourself and Ethan at all costs, or do you still try to pull Daniel back from?" The fire, her words sat heavy in the room, because deep down I knew it wasn't really a choice. Daniel was my son. No matter how far he had fallen, no matter the crimes, the lies, the threats, I couldn't stop loving him. Maybe, just maybe, that love was the one thread still holding him together. That afternoon, Detective Carter returned with another twist. "Daniel's been asking to see you," he said. "Not as a suspect, but as a son. He swears he wants to talk before we move forward." I looked at Ethan, then back at the detective. My shoulder throbbed, my body weak, but I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in months: resolve. If my boy was reaching out, even from the bottom of that pit, I had to be there, not to excuse him, not to erase what he'd done. Remind him he wasn't alone. That night, as I lay in the hospital bed listening to the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing beside me, I prayed for strength. Strength to heal, strength to raise my grandson, and strength to face Daniel one more time. Because this story wasn't over. And the hardest part, the part where love and justice collide, was still ahead. They moved me out of the hospital sooner than I expected. My shoulder was wrapped tight, the pain dulled by medicine, but the truth was clear. I wasn't ready to go home. Detective Carter insisted on placing Ethan and me in a safe house, a small bungalow on the outskirts of town. It had plain furniture, bare walls, and a single lock on the door that looked too flimsy to hold back the kind of men chasing after my son, but for a few nights felt like a refuge. Ethan slept in the small bedroom while I lay awake in the living room, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows. Fear has a way of sharpening your senses. One morning, Carter arrived with Sarah. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the air heavy with what they were about to say. "Richard," Carter began, his voice low, "Daniel isn't just on the run. We have reason to believe he's carrying evidence cache, drugs, maybe even weapons that belongs to the men after him. And they won't stop until they get it." Sarah leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Your son asked to see you. He wants to talk, but it has to be in a controlled setting. We'll be there, and he'll be safe. The question is, are you ready?" I didn't answer right away. My chest tightened, and for a long moment, I stared at the chipped edge of the kitchen counter. I had spent months despising the man my son had become. Yet the thought of him wandering the streets, hunted like prey, was unbearable. Finally, I nodded. If he's reaching out, I can't turn him away. The meeting was arranged in a church basement on the far side of town. The place smelled of old wood and coffee grounds, the kind of quiet space where people came to confess their sins. I walked in with my arms still stiff from the wound Ethan left behind with Margaret for safety. Daniel sat at a folding table, his head down, a paper cup of water untouched in front of him. His face was pale, thinner than I remembered, his once sharp, clothes replaced by a borrowed sweatshirt. For a moment, he looked like a lost boy again, when he finally lifted his eyes to mine. I saw something I hadn't seen in years. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I'm sorry for everything. I was drowning and I pulled you down with me." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "You hurt me, son. You hurt Ethan, but you're still my boy. It doesn't change." Tears welled in his eyes, but before he could answer, the basement door creaked open. Carter and another officer stepped inside, their expressions tense. "We need to cut this short," Carter said sharply. "We've got reports that some of the men who've been after Daniel spotted him earlier today. They might be closing in." Daniel's shoulders slumped. He looked at me, fear flooding his face. "They'll never let me go, Dad. Not unless I hand them something bigger than what I owe." The words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked. Asterisk, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "I've been keeping records, names, shipments, places, enough to bury the whole operation. But if they find out I talked, they'll kill me and maybe you too." The room fell silent, the weight of his confession pressing down on all of us. Carter exchanged a glance with the other officer. "If that's true, it could be our way to put these men away for good. But Daniel, it also paints a target on your back." I looked at my son, trembling in that metal chair, and felt something shift inside me. He wasn't just the boy who had stolen from me. He was a man trapped in a nightmare of his own making, desperate for a way out. As we left the church, Carter ushered us toward an unmarked car. But before we reached it, I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. Across the street, a dark sedan idled, its windows tinted. Daniel stiffened. "They found us," he whispered. And in that instant, I knew the fragile line between hope and disaster was about to snap. The moment I saw that dark sedan across from the church, my stomach dropped. I'd lived long enough to trust those quiet instincts that warn you when something's wrong, and everything in me screamed we were in danger. Carter barked an order, pushing Daniel and me toward the unmarked police car. The officer beside him reached for his radio, but before he could speak, sedan's engine roared to life. Two men stepped out, moving fast, their hands hidden in jackets that told me they weren't there for polite conversation. Carter drew his weapon, his voice steady but sharp. Inside the car. Now, Daniel froze. His face had gone pale, sweat beading at his temples. For the first time, I saw just how terrified he really was. Not of the law, not of me, but of the people he had crossed. We scrambled into the unmarked car. Carter slammed the door shut behind us and jumped into the driver's seat, tires squealing as he pulled into traffic. For a moment I thought we'd made it, and I looked back. The sedan was on our tail, headlights glaring like eyes that refused to blink. Daniel gripped the seat in front of him. "They're not going to stop, Dad. They want what I have or they'll take me out." I turned toward him, my voice breaking. "Son, what is it you're hiding that's worth your life?" His jaw tightened. "Evidence. Ledgers. Phone recordings. Enough to put half their operation in prison." I thought if I held on to it I could bargain my way free. But all I did was paint a bigger target on myself. The car swerved as Carter took a hard right onto a side street. Sirens wailed in the distance, backup racing our way. Yet in the chaos, a strange clarity settled over me. For months, I'd seen Daniel as nothing but a stranger man driven by greed, willing to bleed his own father dry. But now, beneath the panic, I saw something else. A man swallowed by mistakes, yes? But also a son finally admitting the truth. We pulled into a police lot, the gates closing just as the sedan skidded to a stop half a block away. The men inside didn't follow. They knew better than to tangle. With uniformed officers head on, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. Inside the safety of the station, Carter laid it out bluntly. "Daniel, if you want protection, you have to cooperate fully. No half-truths, no holding back. We'll file for witness protection if your information checks out, but you'll need to testify." Daniel's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he didn't argue, just nodded, as if surrender was the only path left. That night, Ethan was brought to the safe house to see me. He ran into my arms, nearly knocking the wind out of me, and for the first time since all this began, I let the tears come. I didn't care if he saw. Sometimes a boy needs to know that even grandfathers cry. When Ethan asked about his father, I hesitated. Then I said, "Your dad made mistakes, big ones. But today he tried to do the right thing, and that matters." Boy looked at me with those steady eyes that always seemed wiser than his years. "Then we can't give up on him, Grandpa." His words cut straight through the fog of doubt that had been choking me. He was right. As broken as Daniel was, he was still family, still my son. That night, as I lay awake, I thought back to when Linda and I first brought Daniel home from the hospital. I remembered holding him in my arms, promising to protect him no matter what. I never imagined protection would one day mean standing between him and the consequences of choices like these, but life has a way of testing promises. And though my body ached, though my heart carried more scars than I could count, I knew one thing with certainty. This fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for redemption, his, mine, and maybe, just maybe, for all of us. The courthouse looked colder than I remembered. Gray walls, polished floors, and a silence that felt heavy, like the building itself knew the weight of the lives being decided inside. I held Ethan's hand as we walked through the double doors, his small fingers squeezing mine tighter than usual. He was trying to be brave, but I could feel the tremor in his grip. Sarah met us in the hallway, her briefcase tucked under one arm, her voice calm and steady. "Richard, today's hearing is about more than just custody. Judge will review Daniel's cooperation and the danger posed by the men after him. It won't be easy, but you need to speak your truth." I nodded, though my heart was pounding. Speaking my truth meant saying things about my son I never thought I'd have to say in public. When we entered the courtroom, the judge already sat, waiting, his glasses low on his nose as he looked over the stack of files before him. I noticed the rows of empty benches behind us and felt grateful. At least there wouldn't be strangers here to witness my family's unraveling. The first part of the hearing went quickly. Sarah presented Ethan's recordings, proof of Daniel admitting to taking my pension. Then came the photographs of the bruises I had tried so hard to hide, evidence of the shove against the wall, the threats. Each piece felt like another stone laid on my chest. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, my injured shoulders stiff beneath the bandages. I told the judge the truth, not just about the money or the threats, but about the years of sacrifice, about the boy Daniel had once been, and about the man he had become. My voice cracked when I spoke of Ethan, how no child should carry the burden of hiding food for his grandfather. Ethan, to my surprise, asked if he could say something. The judge allowed it, and my grandson stepped forward, his voice steady though his eyes shimmered with tears. "Your Honor," he said, "I love my dad, but I don't feel safe with him right now. My grandpa takes care of me, makes sure I eat, that I do my homework, that I feel safe at night. Please, let me stay with him." The room went silent. Even the judge leaned back, his expression softening at the courage of a 12-year-old boy who had spoken with more clarity than most adults could manage. After a pause that felt like hours, the judge ruled. Custody of Ethan would remain with me, under the court's protection, until a full hearing could take place. He signed the papers, his gavel striking the desk like a final heartbeat, sealing the decision. Relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. Because as the judge confirmed Ethan's safety, Daniel's absence screamed louder than any words could. He hadn't shown up. He hadn't fought for his son, not even for himself. After the hearing, Carter met us outside. His expression was grim. We found Daniel's car abandoned again, this time near the docks. We're not sure if he's running or if someone has him cornered. Either way, things are escalating. I looked at Ethan, who clung to my arm, his face pale. "Grandpa," he whispered, "what if Dad doesn't come back?" I knelt down slowly, ignoring the ache in my body, and placed both hands on his shoulders. "Ethan, no matter what happens, you will never be alone. You have me. You have Margaret, Sarah, and Officer Carter. And you have the strength inside you, the same strength I see in your eyes every day." That night, back at the safe house, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the small window, watching the moon hang low over the quiet street, and thought about the path that had brought us here. My son was out there somewhere, tangled in choices that could end his life. My grandson was asleep in the next room, dreaming of a normal childhood he had been robbed of, and I was caught between them. A father torn apart, a grandfather holding on, as the clock ticked past midnight. I whispered a silent promise. I would protect Ethan no matter the cost. But I would not stop searching for Daniel. Because somewhere beneath the mistakes, the debts, and the darkness, he was still my son. And I wasn't ready to give up on him, not yet. Asterisk after the court hearing, life didn't fall neatly into place the way I had hoped. Ethan was safe with me, that much I could breathe easier about, but the storm surrounding us hadn't passed. If anything, it was only shifting, circling closer in ways I could feel but not yet see. That night, after Ethan fell asleep on the couch with his homework spread out beside him, I sat at the kitchen table staring at a blank sheet of paper. For the first time in years, I made 3 columns across the page. What they know, what they don't, what I want them to think. It was a trick I'd used back when I ran construction crews, keeping track of projects, budgets, and deadlines. Funny how life's hardest battles sometimes call for the simplest tools in the first column. I wrote what Daniel and those men already knew. My pension checks, the little I kept in savings, the house. In the second column, I wrote the secrets. I still had a small insurance policy Linda had taken out before she passed. A few personal accounts nobody else knew about, and documents I had tucked away that proved the house was solely mine. The third column was the hardest. What I wanted others to think. That I was too weak to fight, that I had nothing left worth taking. As I filled in the page, a strange calm settled over me. For months, I'd felt like life was happening to me like I was being shoved from one crisis to the next. But now, for the first time, I felt like I was laying down the pieces of a plan. The next morning, I hired a moving service. Not to leave town, not yet, but to gather every box of Daniel's old belongings that still lingered in my house. Baseball trophies, college textbooks, even the winter coats he'd never bothered to reclaim. Each item was packed carefully, sealed, and labeled with his name. When the movers asked where to deliver them, I gave them Daniel's last known address. I slipped a handwritten note into each box, returning what belongs to you, keeping what belongs to me. Later that day, I watched from the window as the movers hauled the last box down the porch steps. Part of me ached at the thought of severing even these quiet ties, but another part felt lighter. For too long, my home had been a battlefield. Now, at least it was mine again. When Daniel showed up that evening, his fury was written all over his face. He slammed the door so hard, the walls shook. "What the hell is this, Dad? You send my stuff back like I'm some stranger?" I met his anger with a steady voice. "Because you are. You don't live here. You don't own this house, and you don't own me." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might strike me again. But instead, he spat on the floor and muttered, "You'll regret this." Then he stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the porch. I didn't follow. I didn't argue, simply closed the door and locked it behind him. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from something else, from resolve. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he asked, "Grandpa, are we going to be okay?" I looked at him, at the boy who had shown more courage than most men twice his age, and I answered with the only truth I knew, "We will, 'cause this house stands and so do we." Still, after he drifted off to sleep, I sat awake by the window, staring into the dark. I knew Daniel's threats weren't empty. He was angry, desperate, and dangerous. But I also knew something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, I had stood tall in front of him, and I hadn't flinched. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, one thing was certain. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a man reclaiming his life, piece by piece. The days that followed were tense. Like living under a sky that never stopped rumbling with thunder. Daniel hadn't been back since the night he stormed out, but I knew he was out there angry, cornered, and looking for a way to claw back control. Ethan could sense it too. I'd catch him staring out the window longer than usual, or double-checking the locks before bed. He didn't say it aloud, but I knew he was afraid of his own father. One evening, just as the sun was sinking behind the trees, I heard the crunch of boots on the gravel outside. My heart skipped. Before I could move, Daniel stepped onto the porch, his figure shadowed in the fading light. He didn't bang on the door this time. Instead, he stood there, shoulders slumped, his voice muffled through the screen. "Dad, let me in." For a moment I froze. Every instinct told me to keep the door locked. But something in his tone fragile, desperate, made me turn the handle. Daniel stepped inside slowly, eyes darting around the room. He looked thinner, worn down, like a man carrying the weight of the world on his back. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I lost everything. The money, the car, even the people I thought were my friends. They're after me, Dad. I've got nowhere else to go." I studied him carefully, torn between anger and sorrow. This was the same son who had stolen from me, threatened me, nearly broken me. Yet here, he was stripped of his bravado, standing in the same kitchen where his mother once baked birthday cakes for him. "Daniel," said softly, "I can't give you money. I won't hand over this house. But if you truly want help, if you're ready to face the mess you've made, I'll stand by you." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy between us. Then his shoulders shook, and tears slid down his face, sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know if I can fix it," he whispered. Ethan appeared in the doorway then, his eyes wide. He looked at his father, then at me, unsure of what to do. Finally, he stepped forward, his small voice breaking the silence. "Dad, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to try." Those words hit harder than any lecture could have. My grandson, 12 years old, had spoken the truth we adults so often forget. Redemption doesn't come from grand gestures. It begins with one step in the right direction. Detective Carter arrived not long after. Daniel didn't run this time. He didn't shout, didn't fight. He simply nodded when Carter explained the terms. Cooperation, testimony, protection, maybe prison time, maybe worse. But at least it was a path forward, a chance to rebuild, however uncertain. After they left, Ethan curled up beside me on the couch. "Grandpa," he asked, "do you think Dad will really change?" I wrapped an arm around him, staring into the darkened window where our reflections sat side by side. "I don't know, champ. But tonight, I saw something I thought was gone forever, man willing to admit he was wrong. And that's where change always starts. As I sit here now, looking back on everything we've lived through, I've learned something worth sharing. Sometimes the people we love the most will hurt us the deepest. But even in betrayal, even in disappointment, there can be a spark of redemption. Protect yourself. Protect those who depend on you, but don't give up on love. Because love, even when bruised, has the power to pull someone back from the edge. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Dignity doesn't mean standing alone. It means standing firm for what's right, while still leaving the door open for forgiveness. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to protect yourself, but still hoped for someone else's redemption? Share it below if you want more stories like this, real, emotional, and filled with lessons we can all carry. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.